And good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. Online at bullfallsradio.com. Mobile devices by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. I'm Chad Holmes, joined by former Wausau West High School head football coach Jason Foster. First of all, welcome. You got some big shoes to fill, Paul Nowinski, but really glad to have you on board for the season.
Well, thank you so much, Chad. Very excited to be here. Been a big fan of the show for a long time and what you do and everything that you bring to light in our area as far as not only football but all sports in our area. So, and please don't make any more comparisons to Paul leading into this. Those are really big shoes to fill. So.
I was thinking, actually, this is, again, it's all due respect. But when you took over for Coach Grundy in terms of what we had to do, not quite as big a wonderful man, great football coach, but not the greatest pregame interview in the world in terms of expanding on it. So the shoes weren't quite as big for the pregame interviews as they are here tonight with Coach Nowinski.
Absolutely.
But let's jump right in. Let people know, first of all, what we have in store for the next 2 hours. We have a couple of special guests coming up at 6:40. We'll be talking to Ryan Winkler, the head football coach of Marathon. The Red Raiders opened their season with a long road trip last week. Went to Racine Christian Life. Fell behind 14-0, but came back and won 28-14. Big game coming up on Friday night at Stanley Boyd, a game that will be heard here on Bull Falls Radio. We'll talk to Ryan Winkler about the Red Raiders and their 2023 prospects coming up at 6:40. And then just after 7 o'clock, it will be our student-athlete guest, DC Everest senior running back Caden Bankston. He was the leading rusher for the Evergreens last week in their victory at Green Bay Preble. He'll be joining us again just after 7 o'clock. Before we jump into the recaps of week number 1 today, 107, I think I saw at one point, was the heat index. Yeah. As it's not football weather, that's for sure. What do you do in terms of days where it's so hot? Because one of the keys as a coach is taking care of your guys, getting your guys ready as well. You don't want to, get them in a position where they get dehydrated and get ill. Boy, a big challenge for everybody today, just 2 days in front of the next, actually for teams like Everest, 1 day in front of of their week 2 game. But as a coach, what do you do in this situation?
That's a great point. It's in my new role as athletic director starting next year. Well, the first thing you do is you kind of go back to the guidelines and say, what do they say? There's pretty clear-cut guidelines as far as what you're supposed to do with heat and humidity and the heat index. And once it gets above these different levels, you make these adjustments. But you talk to your coach. And you make sure that everyone's on the same page. You limit practice. You get your helmets and shoulder pads off as much as possible. You try to do it at a time of day, either early in the morning or later at night, if possible. And you shorten things up, and you go inside to maybe spend a little more time watching film, maybe doing a little bit more mental. We kind of compared notes as conference athletic directors today. What was everybody doing with all their sports? And it was interesting. There was a lot of consistencies, but there was some nuances out there as well. For example, DC Everest plays on Friday, so today was probably a walk-through day for them anyway, so probably more of a mental day, probably no helmets and shoulder pads. Probably good for them today, although it's supposed to be pretty warm tomorrow, so maybe they deal with it a little bit more in live action on Thursday night versus Friday night. Sounds like Friday is supposed to be a little better. We've had a great 2.5 weeks of camp here leading up. So yeah, this is kind of the first dose of oppressive heat, but you got to hydrate. That's a big one.
Let's talk about week number 1, and you said it. Boy, last week, Thursday and Friday, both were outstanding nights for football. And starting with the Valley Football Association, there were some games split. Basically, 3 games were played on Thursday night, and then 5 more played on Friday. And last Thursday, DC Everest, again, we'll be talking plenty of Evergreen football with Caden Bankston later on, but Everest earned a week 1 win, 40-21 over Green Bay Preble. Their new quarterback, Logan George, was 7 of 12 passing, 129 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Pearson McDonald had 3 catches, 75 yards and a touchdown. Caden Bankston, our guest coming up, 9 rushes, 65 yards and a score. I watched the game, and it looked like the Evergreens were able to get a lot of kids in. They were able in week one to get a good look. But going on the road to Preble, getting a week one win, obviously the way you want to start. Preble's not a team that's expected to be among the top teams in their league, but at the same time, a solid start for DC Everest.
Yeah, absolutely. Going on the road, winning a high school football game in general is hard work, a lot of effort that goes into it. Winning on the road in week one, that's another challenge altogether. And overall, if you look at the stats and the numbers, a really balanced attack. They were able to throw the ball a little bit, they were able to run the ball, and played pretty solid defense. So that as a coach, you come out of there healthy with a week one road win, and you come back and get ready for Chippewa Falls week 2.
There were a lot of road games for the Valley Football Association squads on the week, and the other 2 games last Thursday, not only road games for a couple of the tri-champions from last season, but a couple of really tough opponents from the Big Rivers. The Marshfield Tigers, they went to Hudson. I said, we were talking before, and I said they played them. No, they don't play them tomorrow. They played them last week. Hudson beat Marshfield 31-0. The thing for the Tigers was they turned it over. And good teams, especially when you're on the road against a good team, you turn it over, and they turned it over 4 times, and each turnover led to a Hudson score. Marshfield obviously struggled offensively. Braden Anderson, 66 rushing yards for Marshfield. I guess it's two-pronged. Obviously, a tough opponent. Hudson, preseason picks in the Big Rivers, a team that's been really solid in the western part of the state. But also, we know that Marshfield is a team that's in a little bit of a rebuilding, and that's one of the good things about having these first 2 weeks, having non-conference games, to learn a lot about your team.
Yeah, again, not only going on the road, but going to a team like Hudson. They kind of anchor down the Division I western half of the state over there. They're kind of the class, the cream of the crop. Like you said, pick to win that conference. And turning the ball over kind of snowballs on you. If you do it, it's kind of not completely unexpected week 1, but when you do it 4 times against a team of that caliber, that's a pretty big hole to get yourself out of.
Likewise, the team that's expected to be second in the conference in the Big Rivers, River Falls. They played host to Wisconsin Rapids, another team that has some really big shoes to fill, starting with their outstanding running back, Leo Brostowitz. And River Falls jumped out to a quick lead, scoring 3 times in the first quarter, 20-0, went on to defeat the Red Raiders 33-7. River Falls, again, balanced, 200 yards rushing, 132 yards through the air. Rapids does what they do, and you so well know it sometimes takes a little time, especially when you lose the parts with the quarterback and the running backs. For Wisconsin Rapids, again, sometimes the schedule doesn't work for you. I think sometimes you would rather play a team that a little bit lower in the standings, but unfortunately for Rapids, they were forced to play River Falls and obviously learned a lot of lessons on that road trip.
Absolutely. Leo has been the engine that makes that offense go for 3 years now, and when you lose that, I mean, not just who and what he was as an athlete, but the position he plays within that offense. It all runs through your fullback. One of the best running backs we've seen in our conference in many years, and to lose that and to start from scratch, and it's a pretty complicated offense that you just don't jump right into. So yeah, they'll took their growing pains last week, but I have high expectations for Coach Biola and what he does over there. And
then Friday, the other VFA teams in action. Now you get the opportunity to second-guess your successor. I tell you, this is probably what you've been waiting for. Wausau West went up to Superior. The Warriors knocked off the Spartans 24-3, but it was a really tight football game. West scored twice late in the first half, in the final minute and a half of the half to take the lead, and then got a defensive touchdown in the fourth quarter to put it away. Ray Reinick, for the first time, did not get 100 yards. Superior really came out, played some tough defense. Reinick, 19 carries, 96 yards, 2 touchdowns. Still a really good effort for the outstanding senior. Carter Amerson, again, I talked about it on the show last week. I think if there's one player that will explode in terms of the numbers compared to last year, it could be Carter Amerson. The only problem for him is he got Ray Reinick carrying the ball a lot because it's hard not to give it to Ray. But Carter Amerson made some really nice grabs, had 4 catches, 88 yards, and the Warrior defense was really solid. So held Superior to 141 total yards. For the Warriors, again, the run game maybe not at the level that we saw last year, but Amerson making some big plays, and especially the defense. I thought both at the line of scrimmage, the linebackers, and the DBs all did a nice job for West.
I would agree. Obviously, another long road trip for week 1, just like other teams in the conference. And it looked like that early in the game. West was a little sluggish early. New offensive line, three different new guys in there, kind of working together with Ray making those reads. Carter did a great job. I thought the defense played really well too. I do think when you look long term for the history of Wausau West, where they're at this this year and where they hope to get at the end of this year, I think being able to have that little bit more balanced attack or balanced approach with being to throw the ball a little bit more and use those weapons that we know we have or we know they have will play a big role in their success long term.
Wausau East earns a big win to start their season off. Last week we had Tyler Kramer on the show, and I said to folks he was confident, and I was a little surprised because going into the season, and I don't mean this derogatory, is the first thought is, will they make it through the season because they had a difficult time getting through a few of the seasons. He came on and talked about the way these guys had worked and the multi-sport athletes that they do have on this team, and he was really on top of it because he took his team up to Minocqua, knocked off Lakeland 23-7. He talked about his quarterback, Pacey Weber. He was 11 of 18, 215 yards, a touchdown, a couple of interceptions, and even ran for 121 yards and 2 scores as well. Caden Worth, his biggest target, 4 catches, 121 yards. Obviously, the defense did its job holding Lakeland to 7 points. Really, I mean, when you come back, when you have no experience varsity football wise, and we talk about, some teams have experience back, other teams don't have experience back. Well, East had no experience back in terms of varsity football. To get a win on the road in week number 1 has to be just an incredible jolt for that entire team. Yeah,
you and I talked about it off air a little earlier. It's kind of like that win is in the bank and earning interest at this point. There was a huge question mark above this team. The fact that they went from where they were 2 years ago and playing 8-man football to last year playing JV and not knowing so the fact that they're fielding 3 11-man football teams at 3 levels this year and go on the road week 1 and pull off that victory, and it was a nice victory. It wasn't a cheapie. It wasn't. It was well earned, and Pacey had a great game. He's a great young man. It was exciting. I'm happy for him and his success, and I think with that win they can kind of start looking at week 2 and down the road a little bit more differently than maybe some people were originally. So good win for them, and we'll see what happens moving forward.
Stevens Point coming off a really tough year a season ago. Had a new head coach, really struggled, had even a chance. It was such a strange year where they even, with all the struggles, they had a chance to get to the playoffs by beating Appleton West at the end. Didn't do it, and only had 2 wins all season long. And they faced a team that was playing very deep into last season. In fact, to the final game of the season, the Division I state championship game, Mukwonago. And Mukwonago, 35-7 winners at Gerke Field last Friday night. For Stevens Point, Braylon Smola carried the ball 27 times for 96 yards and a touchdown. Grant Chardonnay had 14 of 22, 129 yards and an interception. Outstanding back for Mukwonago, Mason Rodobicki had 20 carries, 154 yards and a touchdown. Again, you get tested at the highest levels in week number 1. What do you take away from it? Obviously, you've had years where you played a really tough opponent in week 1. You had other years where you played maybe a team that wasn't expected to be as good. What do you take away from a game against an opponent such as Mukwonago if you're Stevens Point?
Well, I think you go into it knowing that when you come out at the end of the game, you're going to kind of know where your team and where your program is at. Obviously, you don't get too high or too low based on what happens in week 1, but it's a challenge going in, and you prepare your team for it accordingly. Like, you know what their strengths are, you know what you're trying to accomplish in your game plan. 35-7 isn't the worst score in the world against what's one of the best Division I teams in the state of Wisconsin, but you also come out knowing you got a lot of work to do, and as you head back into your conference in 2 weeks.
Hortonville picked from WisSports.net in their preseason rankings as second behind Wausau West. They faced a very good West Appear squad. West Appear always a really terrific program in that part of the state. And West Appear was able to hold off Hortonville 25-14. Quarterback Broden Budson was 13 of 36. Got good yardage, 219 yards, TD and 2 interceptions. And West Appear used their pass game, 355 yards through the air, negative 14 rushing, but still earned the win. I guess in terms of the big news for Hortonville, Ben Smith, one of the top linebackers in the state, returned to the Hortonville squad. Again, he outstanding football player, but also a guy that has Olympic dreams in track and field, a University of Oregon commit, one of the top throwers in the country. So obviously there is some expectations with Hortonville, a new head coach, a program that seems to have had talent but have not been able to put it together. Number 1, they fall to a good team, but number 2, it has to be a great jolt in a positive way to get Smith back.
Yeah, I think there should be real high expectations for Hortonville this year. That not only with Ben Smith, they're pretty gifted at all three levels on their defense. They got a D1 type player on their D line, now back at linebacker and in their secondary as well. So they're pretty balanced. And when you throw the ball 36 times for 219 yards, you know their offense is pretty potent. They're a big play football team, as we've seen over the years. And I think I'm going to watch them very closely because I think they have the potential to sneak up on a lot of people and see where they're at the end of the year.
And we'll see in week 8 when West plays over there, because it's never too early to look always ahead of all those. But for us in the media, for you coaches, you never look past this Friday night or Thursday night, whatever it may be. And finally, Appleton West. And Appleton West lost to Manitowoc Lincoln 29-6. Don't really have much information on that game except Appleton West scored in the final seconds of the game. Obviously, and I think we were talking off air, stability within a program. And this is a tough area because you got so many good football programs in the Fox Valley and, right in Appleton with Appleton North and the success they've had. And I think some stability at East. Appleton West, they need stability. And obviously this is the last year where West and Everest and, the other teams in the VFA will have to worry about them. But it's hard, isn't it, to really turn things around when you have so much competition around you?
It is. It's really hard. They're in a tough spot. They're playing 2 levels of football again this year, freshman and varsity level. Traditionally, Manitowoc is not an outstanding program, so that was probably a game they were looking forward to kind of seeing where their rebuilding process was at and to come out and compete, and maybe they didn't do that as well as they'd like. And I think a good comparison to them is Appleton East. I think the Appleton East is doing all the right things and really heading in the right direction, and they still are struggling to get over the hump with the competition in that conference over there. And I think Appleton West is still maybe in that turnover stage, like they've kind of turned over coaches again this year, and they're just trying to figure out a way to kind of settle in, get a few years. I mean, when you come in as a new coach, if you're able to do it, it's a 5-year process. Like year 1, you kind of establish your routines and your standards and what you're trying to work for and towards, and you don't really worry about wins and losses. You talk about competing and mental toughness and those sorts of things. And with a new coach, that's right back where they're at. So hopefully he can kind of turn the corner a little bit as the season goes on and then build towards the future.
We got to take a quick timeout. We'll come back, talk about other action in week number 1 of the season last week. We'll talk about the Great Northern Conference, the Merriwood Conference coming up. And again, coming up in just a little bit at 6:40, we'll be talking to Marathon head football coach Ryan Winkler. And then at just after 7 o'clock, DC Everest senior Caden Bankston. It's the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. And welcome back. Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app with former Wausau West head football coach Jason Foster. I'm Chad Holmes. Let's talk about the Great Northern Conference. And before you joined the program, and for the last few years, we've had a really good top of the GNC. Everybody else has been trying to establish a toehold. And the thing about it, you've got some programs in that conference that have had success. Anago, back when we were growing up, they were the powerhouse. I mean, they had huge games against Everest and Stevens Point back in the day, trying to bounce back. Looking at this league, as we jump into the results, rough week number 1. Let's start off with the team that's expected, and I think justly expected to be at the top of the league because of the success they've had and the talent they have back is Mosinee, and they ran into a buzzsaw in Stratford. The Stratford Tigers, of course, won the Division 6 state championship a year ago and have so much back, led by their outstanding running back, Kohler Kilty, and Stratford defeated Mosinee 33-14. Kilty, 29 rushes, 153 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did not pass a lot, but Stratford was effective when they did. 6 of 8, 78 yards, and a couple of touchdowns for Jack Tubbs. And the thing that jumped out was Mosinee, 166 yards of total offense. Outstanding receiver, Keegan Jershely, 3 catches, 25 yards. Again, week 1, you got to take a lot with a grain of salt. I think what we did learn is Stratford is ready to, I think, build on a state championship. And Mosinee, I think, learned a lot because, frankly, they may not see the challenges during the conference season that they're going to see when we get to late October. And this will be a good game that they'll probably bring back late in October when we get to the playoffs.
Yeah, this has kind of been one of those week one marquee matchups that we've been excited about over the last 3 years. These have been outstanding games back and forth. And I think what we saw from Stratford was a very typical powerhouse Stratford type game. Very, very efficient on offense, pounding the football. And then when they do throw it, being very efficient and successful in that regard. Obviously, all reports out there are that not only are they returning state champions, but all through last year in this offseason, the thought and the belief was that they were going to be better this year than they were last year. And I would say against a tough tested opponent like Mosinee to come out and have that type of performance, I think speaks pretty well to what it's going to look like for Stratford this year. Mosinee going to bounce back. I mean, there's a lot of weapons there. Got a lot to look forward to, but yeah, that's a tough loss in week one for them.
This is kind of a Merrillwood, I should say, a Great Northern Central Wisconsin Large, because that was a battle between two teams in the Merrillwood and CWC Large. Another game saw Wittenberg-Burnhamwood from the CWC Large defeat Antigo 56-7, 42-0 at halftime. It's a tough first half for the Robins, and then what happens? The kickoff is returned for a touchdown to begin the third quarter. Nathan Wapekane, returning QB for the Chargers, 10 of 16, 213 yards, 3 touchdowns. Marshall Fraser, 5 catches, 125 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7 quarterback sacks for Wittenberg-Burnhamwood. Antigo actually, in terms of everything I've read, expects to be better this year. They've had some issues with participation. They do have better participation, but Wittenberg-Burnhamwood really has turned that program around the last 4 or 5 years, and it looks like they're going to be a challenge for Stratford in that CWC Large, along with, of course, Amherst as well.
Yeah, that's, I think, what do you take away from this game is that Wittenberg's there. I mean, they've kind of proven that these last few years, and they've turned over some really great athletes. So do you question is, did they make those runs based on those really good, they have the great quarterback and the great receiver? And no, like, it's a program. Like, they're heading in the right direction, doing good things. And Antigo's a struggle. They, like you said, they ran into a buzzsaw, and they regroup, and I think there's some wins sitting out there for them in the GNC once they get into that season. So it'll be good for both, but it really intrigues those matchups down the road for Wittenberg with Stratford and Amherst.
I'm going to put two games together because I think it's sort of an example here of what is going on in the GNC. And Medford is a team that's been so good recent years, but it's a team that is, I think, again, a little bit of a rebuilding project, and they faced a good competition. Again, the kind of competition you'll see in the playoffs, and they fell to New Richmond 44-24, 34-0 at halftime, and really never in it was Medford. And Merrill at home lost to Osceola 41-0. And I know that Merrill, they took a major step forward last year. They made it back to the playoffs. Has to be a little disappointing for them. I think two teams that had success last season in different ways, but boy, they found out there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, I think in New Richmond and Osceola, those are absolutely two nice programs. I don't know a lot about New Richmond other than they have some really nice speed and really athletic kids on their team. I always give Medford a lot of credit for who they schedule for their non-conference games because they know who and what they are and what they're going to see in the postseason. So again, they did that again this year, and I think they are in a little bit of a turnover rebuilding. Obviously, when you lose a quarterback the caliber of Baumgartner and moving forward will be tough. And Merrill, kind of the same, probably a similar story to Antigo in where they're at and where the competition and the matchups they're going to have going through the GNC, where they're going to look to pick up those wins this year.
Rhinelander gave a little bit of joy to the GNC. One of two teams to win. The other team was Hayward, 21-14 over Cumberland. But Rhinelander, they trailed 21-0 in the second quarter. And the thing about that, and they came back and won 22-21 at Tomahawk. The thing that's impressive about that, multiple ways. Number one, they had a really rough year a season ago. They had been in the playoffs for a couple of years and then really hit a wall last season, had a struggle moving the football, getting any points, and to be down by 3 touchdowns and come back and get a 19-yard field goal with 3 seconds left, got the running game going again. They had a good running game a couple of years back, had really nothing last season. James Heck had 128 yards and 3 scores on the ground for Rhinelander. Tomahawk has to be disappointed. They have a new head coach and looked like they were going to, for the second straight year, defeat Rhinelander. Got 16 rushes, 101 yards, and a touchdown from Rex Riley. But, boy, a week one win for a program that struggled last season, similar to East, but in a different way here for Rhinelander coming from behind. Again, it has to be a big joltage of energy for the Hodags.
Yeah, I think Tomahawk really feels like they're heading in the right direction too. I know they have a new coach this year, but they had a couple nice wins last year. And I think the other intriguing thing about this game is Tomahawk comes back into the GNC
right.
next year. So some of these matchups will kind of be year in and year out. So to have that Rhinelander-Tomahawk rivalry back in there, that's kind of a exciting thing for that neck of the woods. Good win for Rhinelander. I think it sets up a great week 2 matchup between the Hodags and the Lumberjacks.
Before we wrap up the GNC real quickly, you said it, Tomahawk back in. Wausau East next year in the GNC for a year. For a program like Tomahawk is one that I think can help the GNC if they go in the right direction. They've been struggling for a number of years, but the facilities have been improved. Last season, they showed some signs of life with wins early against both Rhinelander and Lakeland. This conference needs teams other than Mosinee and Medford to step up.
It's kind of ironic. Before coming back down to Wausau 12 years ago, I was up in Eagle River at Northland Pines. So I went through that process where the old Lumberjack transitioned into the GNC and Northland Pines went up north into the UP, and Tomahawk kind of went to the Marywood for a while. So they got out of when Merrill and Anago and those teams were rolling, but then they got put in with Edgar and Stratford, and so it wasn't great for them either. So I think this 15-year process and what's bringing that conference back together, it should be a really exciting conference next year, the GNC.
Marywood, this is the last year for the Marywood Conference in football, which is, again, crazy, but it is. And last Thursday, Pittsville started with a 34-16 win over Augusta. Jacob Hardinger, 6 of 7, 129 yards and a touchdown. Dawson Luther, 18 rushes, 163 yards and 3 touchdowns. They were an interesting team a year ago because they made a late rush. The record overall wasn't great, but they were able to win their last couple of games to get into the playoffs and actually played competitively with Assumption in Level 1. Pittsville's always they've had, in athletics generally, they've had some pretty good teams, and then it's very much a roller coaster for Pittsville.
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up in Wausau my entire life, you follow Pittsville. Their basketball teams, their football teams, and like you said, they're up and down. But having that strong finish last year and to start this year with a 36-14 win, that's got to get them excited heading into week 2.
Marathon beat Kenosha Christian Life on Friday, 28-14. Marathon rallied from a 14-0 deficit. We'll talk more about the Marathon Red Raiders this game and their season with Ryan Winkler coming up. But Marathon is interesting. They were kind of the opposite of Pittsville last season. They actually had a pretty good start, had a chance again in the playoffs, and really was a loss to Pittsville that knocked them out. Marathon is always interesting because they have so much success in basketball on the boys' side and in baseball as well. They just have not been able to they've been, I think, got knocked down a lot by the Stratfords and the Edgars of the world, have not been able to take that next step. They have some good years in the last 6-7 years, but the consistency on the gridiron hasn't been there for Marathon.
Yeah, I was going to say they had that nice run for 4 or 5 years in there where they were still finishing third behind Stratford and Edgar, but they were competitive in making the playoffs. I think being down 14-0 at halftime, you go into week 1, and one of the things you want to learn is your character, your toughness, what your level of compete is. I would say being down 14-0, coming back and having a nice win does speak to some of those things. So Coach is going to I would assume he's happy about that.
I'm sure it made for a much better 3-hour and 45-minute trip home after that one as well. Again, we'll talk to Coach Winkler coming up in about 10 minutes here on the program. Edgar fell to Ellsworth at home 8-6. It was a battle of the teams that could make the 2-point conversion. Ellsworth made theirs. Edgar didn't. Carter Butt, who is expected to be one of the best players in Central Wisconsin this year. Big night, 24 carries, 193 yards, also 8 tackles on defense. You look at those numbers, you feel like, man, they should have got more than 6 points. But again, it's sometimes you can move the ball between the 20s and not finish. And obviously, as Edgar challenges themselves, they try to be ready for when the games. They all count, but then they really count when the playoffs begin. And Jerry Sins knows the road during the regular season. Yeah,
I obviously couldn't have more respect for any coach around than I do for Coach Sins, and I can only imagine how much this game got under his skin a little bit. But talk about an Edgar score. Edgar going up against a high-quality opponent in Ellsworth and 8-6, that's about exactly what you'd expect. How many of the Stratford Edgar games have kind of gone that same route? Single scores, 1 or 2 point games late. And when you rush for 193 yards and you only end up with 6 points, I'm sure they're game planning this week to figure out how to translate that into a few more points.
A game last week when I was talking about the week 1 games, I thought maybe could have been one that was an upset because Colby lost a lot to graduation. Neilsville Granton had made a step forward over in the Clover Belt and had a lot back. And it was 8-8 at halftime, but Colby was able to pull away to defeat Neillsville Granton 24-8. Colby does what they do, 235 yards, but it was more of a old-time Big Ten, the Bo Schembechler, Woody Hayes type with 4.5 yards per carry. But Colby has been so good. I mean, they since coming to the Merriwood Conference and the challenge that was, they have been just outstanding. It's just been a consistently outstanding program in recent years.
Yeah, obviously they're coached very, very well. I've listened to their coaches talk down at the clinic for years. And 8-8 game at halftime. I think there was a lot to learn, a lot of character building in that game, and they'll kind of put that in their back pocket moving forward too, as far as the type of team they are and the battles they'll have moving forward. 235 yards rushing, and they worked for them. So,
yeah.
I mean, they have a game plan, they stick to it, and it worked for them.
And obviously, if you get 235 on the ground, 4.5 yards, that means you're still moving those sticks. You're methodical, wearing them down. And one of the really interesting stories in high school football in this area has been Auburndale. They had number issues. They actually went down and played sort of a hybrid season a couple of years back where they played some 11-man, they played some 8-man, returned, shared the conference championship by knocking off Colby in Week 9 last year. They started with a Milwaukee Hamilton team that's obviously not at the level that you're going to see during the conference campaign, but generally 63-0 last week for Auburndale. But what it shows again that, boy, you can be sometimes at the top of the mountain, sometimes you can be in the deepest valley, and if you keep working, you're going to be able to work your way back. And this Auburndale program has done exactly that.
Yeah, I think we talked about Wausau East earlier. I think this is a very similar situation, and what it takes is a commitment, just like Wausau East. It takes a commitment from everybody involved, your administration, your community, with the people within it, and those numbers dip down, and you can go up or you can go down from that point. And what it takes in order to bring those numbers back up is a commitment, and then putting the right people in the right positions from a coaching standpoint. And at that point, it's not about wins and losses. It's about getting kids back out, and it's about making sure that they're having fun in the process. And then that fun turns into hard work, work turns into competition turns into wins, and here they are.
And finally, from the Merriwood, Abbotsford defeated Loyal in a non-conference game, 36-16. Abbotsford was strange last season. They started off with 4 wins in a row, then lost 5 in a row, ultimately had their stretch of playoff appearances come to an end. But one thing Abbotsford does is they run the football. They run it. And their top 2 returning ball carriers, J.V. Castillo and Christian Fuentes, both were outstanding. Castillo, 14 carries, 135 yards, 2 scores. Fuentes had 10 carries, 122 yards and a touchdown, 379 yards rushing as a team, which is not unusual for Abbotsford. We've seen them over 400 and over 500 yards rushing as a team. And they have that offense, that option that I've done them a couple of times, and I tell you, it takes me a while for the eyes to really pick up all the movement and the fakes in the backfield. That makes it very difficult for all their opponents.
Yeah, Abbotsford reminds me a little bit of Pittsville historically. Like, you hear Abbotsford, you think tough. And in this conference, you got to be able to run the football in order to be successful. And obviously, over time, they've proven they can do that. And if you can consistently do that week in and week out, you're going to have a good chance of winning the game. You're going to have a good chance of making a run in the playoffs.
We're going to go through the CWC a little bit quickly because we talked a little bit about Stratford and Wittenberg, Burnhamwood on the large side. Amherst, again, just a heartbreaking finish last season where they had an eligible player that led to a forfeit the week of the Stratford game. They beat Stratford in Week 9, who ultimately won a state championship, but their season was over. And it looked like they were mad last week. They scored 65 against Clintonville, winning 65-19. They ran for 400 yards, well over 10 yards per carry. Michael Benjamin, one of the games of the week, 5 touchdowns on only 9 carries, 136 yards. Weston Allen, 10 carries, 136 yards, 2 scores for Amherst. But again, that's the kind of thing that rocks a program, but it looks as though they're ready to battle again against really great competition in that conference.
Yeah, this definitely seems like one of those remember the Titans, leave no doubt type of games. Like, they're ready to send a message out there that they're back, not happy about the way things ended last year. And as we mentioned earlier, there's going to be some outstanding games in this conference that you're looking forward to talking about them as previews and following up with how they go.
going to give you the rest of the scores involving CWC Large here. The team right below the top tier, I think, is Wyowega Fremont. They had a solid season a year ago, got much better, and they beat Bellevue 37-28 last week. Nakusa knocked off Ripon 40-18. Good start for Nakusa. Shiocton, who made it deep all the way down to a state last season, a Cinderella run, but it looks like they are facing a rejuvenated Iola Scandinavia squad who beat them 32-7. Manawa was a victor 42-7 over Chautauqua Weyerhaeuser. St. Croix beat Spencer Columbus 70-0. Boy, Spencer Columbus had some really good teams a couple of years back, but they took a dip last season. It looks like they're still trying to work their way back. And CWC Small, wanted to mention a couple of games on that side. Assumption, who's done so well since this conference has been formed for them, 69-0 over Necedah, 50-0 at halftime. And Pacelli also right there with Assumption. Assumption and Pacelli were the two teams that made the playoffs a year ago from that conference. And Pacelli beat Catholic Central 54-18. Ethan Cowart had 26 rushes, 242 yards, and 4 TDs for Pacelli. But that conference has been really a godsend, for lack of a better term, for these programs, because the numbers were, when you face some of these teams in the Cloverwood or the Merriwood, boy, it's just too much. Yeah. And it's really fit these two programs who are well coached and really pretty consistent. And they both made the playoffs and off to really good starts.
I think it's like you mentioned, the conference plays a big role in that, and I think it gives them the opportunity to compete and win some games and have success, and also kind of keep that 11-man game. I think if they stay on a path in some of those conferences with the big schools, you lose your numbers, and then you're faced with some tough decisions. And these two schools have really found success in this conference, and I think that's the whole. People kind of a lot of grumbling sometimes with the restructuring of the football conferences in the state, the football only conferences, and I think when you look at teams like this and conferences like this, it really speaks to the success and the fortune that comes with some really good decision making. Disrupts some rivalries and some long-standing traditions, and I understand that part of it, but ultimately they're trying to make football better for everybody, and I think they've accomplished that again moving forward.
Coming up, we are going to have our guest coming up in just a little bit. We will be talking to Caden Bankston, the senior running back from DC Everest, just after the top of the hour. And up next, Ryan Winkler, the head football coach of Marathon. That's straight ahead as we continue here on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio 98.9 and 1230. And welcome back. Chad Holmes along with Jason Foster, the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices, and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. Well, coming up on Friday night, our live game here on Bull Falls Radio will be the Marathon Red Raiders at Stanley Boyd, part of a doubleheader of action here on Bull Falls Radio. And the Marathon Red Raiders come in with a 1-0 record, and we're very happy to welcome as our coach guest for this week, the head man of the Red Raiders, Ryan Winkler. And Coach, first of all, thanks for spending a few minutes with us.
Yeah, once again, thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And let's jump right into last week, because obviously you go into the off season, and then practice begins, and you're ready to face the team that's on your schedule for week number 1. And all through the offseason, it said Rib Lake Prentice. Well, in the end, Rib Lake Prentice was not able to put out a varsity football team. So you and your athletic director have to find a new opponent. And your opponent happens to be down near the southern border of the state in Kenosha Christian Life. So a very long road trip. But in the end, you're able to make the long trip home with a 28-14 victory. Impressive in that you fell behind 14-0 and came back to win it. Obviously, it had to be a little bit jarring to have to change up your first opponent to start off the season. How did you guys go about that, and were there some nervous moments that you would not even have a week 1 game?
Yeah, we're kind of getting used to it. Seems like every year we have a team that cancels on us. Recently, a couple years ago, our first game was Sturgeon Bay, and they canceled, and I can't remember who we picked up that year, even if I don't think we did. And so it was great that we picked up a game, and we had a long bus trip down. We usually don't take coach, but they even let us take coach bus down. So we left early, on the way down, took a break. And I did, we have a younger team this year, a lot of sophomores playing. We do have quite a few seniors, but not all the seniors played last year on the varsity field. So It was a shaky start for us. I think they had a 15 or 16 play drive to start. Then we went 3 and out, and then I think they had another 12 or 13 play drive, and then we got the ball rolling again. I think it took our kids a little time to, hey, we can play football, we can do this. We made some adjustments on defense. We just were giving away the cutback lane too much. Once we took care of that, things started to roll for us pretty well.
So, Coach, kind of going back to that moment, I think we talked earlier in the show before you came on about how those week one opponents you're kind of looking to see. You work all off season, you kind of have a game plan and what you're trying to do from an X's and O's standpoint, but also from a character building, mental toughness, compete level stuff. Was that kind of one of those moments going down? And those long drives like that, I think they're worse than the big play touchdowns. So you kind of probably on roller skates a little bit. What did you guys say and talk about in the huddle to turn that back around?
We just said, I think, first of all, I think it was really good for us to have a game like that to start and then come out with the victory. I don't want to take anything away from Rib Lake Prentice, but when they do have 17 to 19 kids out, we kind of figured if we had that game, it wasn't going to be a big challenge for us. So we probably, by driving down there and playing this game and being down 14-0 early, Kenosha Christian, they had some nice athletes, nice running backs, and a really good line. They just didn't have a lot of depth. But we just said, hey, it's early. We're down 14-0, but there's still 8 minutes left, I think, in the second quarter. And we just said, hey, it's a long game. We can't give up now. And it was really nice to see these guys respond the way they did. Down 14-0 early, 2 long drives, it could have rolled the other way really easy, and the kids didn't let that happen.
Yeah, that's great.
What about offensively? Obviously, you said it was a bit of a slow start. I know you had 2 quarterbacks as well, which I think can be a little difficult at times as well, alternating. But what worked offensively to help you get those 4 scores and turn things around?
We got to the outside. We ran our jet play, and we got 3 big plays to the outside, and that set up our backside, our quick belly, we call it, to our quarterback. And Drew Thurs, who is our sophomore quarterback, he's kind of the runner of the 2. He can throw the ball as well. We're fortunate. We have Cooper Huxma, who played really well last year as a junior. Drew, as a sophomore now, he's gone to a bunch of tricky camps, and he just works his tail off. And I told our group, I told both of them, I said, hey, you guys are competing. And we got 2 to 3 games. He was probably going to get the majority of the snaps, but you're both going to play all year. We're going to have packages for you. And it's just not, I said, the quarterback room we have here at Marathon is probably one of the best in Central Wisconsin. So it's really nice to have those guys.
And speaking of those 2, I had a chance to do some Marathon baseball during the spring, and Drew, as a freshman, stepped right in and was an outstanding performer, for a team that, made it all the way to the sectional final. And, of course, Cooper, being a multi-sport guy as well, it feels as though those are the type of kids that you would want as quarterbacks. Those guys that are multi-sport guys, those guys that have been leaders in different situations. I imagine that helps that quarterback situation to have really guys that have been through the mix in different ways.
You are correct. That's all I have to say. Yep, you're right. They have. True as a freshman played some varsity basketball. He played some varsity football last year on defense, and he got in and played some varsity basketball in some big playoff games for us. And like you said, he started on the baseball team, and Cooper's been through it all. And Cooper had a pretty good year last year. So we're very fortunate to have those 2 guys. They both kind of, Cooper is probably more he'll throw the ball more for us. He'll stay in the pocket a little bit. But he's a good athlete. And I told him, Cooper, in this offense, you got to run the ball. And he's been more willing to run the ball. He ran a couple of times on Friday night. So I think he knows that if he wants to play quarterback in this offense, he's going to have to run a little bit with our RPO game. And True embraces that. He loves the running and the contact. So, yeah, they're both great athletes. So that's what we're looking for at Marathon now is we want great athletes at quarterback because we got to get them to run the ball and put some pressure on the defense.
Yeah, having 2 quarterbacks is certainly a blessing, and obviously by scoring 28 unanswered after going down by 14 is a great run. The other side of that is you gave up 14 to start the game and then none the rest of the game. Who played well for you on defense, Coach?
Peyton Lawrence was great on the line. He was probably our star player on defense. He's a senior lineman, worked really hard, has some goals he wants to reach, and he just did a fantastic job of holding down the D line for us. And he's a good leader as well. Luke Ashbrenner from the linebacker spot. Early on, our linebackers weren't reading the best. They were kind of, they saw that clear hole and they weren't shooting through there. They were kind of overplaying it, and they're getting cutbacks on us. But they cleaned that up. Tyler Underwood had a really good game from his cornerback spot, had a pick, and then True's playing safety for us as well, and he came up and thumped people. He we even had a safety like that. Not taking anything away from our safeties in the past, but True, like I said, True's a football player. He wants to come up and he's filling the alley. He's filling it hard.
I love it. I love it when your quarterback's coming up and thumping people. That's fantastic.
Right.
Again, we're talking to Ryan Winkler, the head football coach of the Marathon Red Raiders. Marathon off a 28-14 win at Kenosha Christian Life last week. Another road game, a number of road games to get things underway for Marathon this week, traveling to Stanley Boyd, a game that will be broadcast right here on Bow Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. Let's take a step back and kind of talk about the program. Last season got off to a pretty good start and had an opportunity late to try to force your way into the playoffs, but did not finish all that well. I wanted to ask you about the state of the program. Number one, how are the numbers going into 2023? And what do you take away from a season where you started off fairly well and then saw the hopes of those postseason games come up just short last year? How do you kind of build on that to try to take that next step?
Let's just say we have to take the next step. Our numbers are really solid. We're at 46 kids, so really happy with that when I hear what some of the programs around the area have. We're ecstatic to have 46 kids out. We talk about our culture here, and right now we're beating the teams that we should beat, and we're competing with the middle teams, but we got to take the next step to compete with the teams that are beating us right now. And the kids know that, and they want to get over the hump. They want to make the playoffs. And they know that we have a couple of games on our schedule that we need this year to make that run in the playoffs and, push some of these teams in our conference. So I think it's just a culture. It's our leadership. We have leadership council all year long, and we talk about things, and hopefully that, helps motivate kids. I tell them I can't be the guy motivating all the time. It's your ship. You guys have to say it. I'll help steer it, but you guys have to give us the energy for it. And it's just a culture, and hoping that we can get there and work hard and just get better at the little details that we have to.
That's it's a great point you make, Coach. Leadership's such a big part of it. Talking to Coach, our head coach at Wausau West, Matt Johnson, he just said he was just talking to Tim Strelo at Everest, and they did some contact days with Kimberly this summer. And so Matt asked him, what's the biggest difference between what we're doing over on this side of the state and what Kimberly's doing? And the biggest thing he said was Kimberly is player-led. Like from everything in practice to drills to the weight room, it's player-led. And I think, what kinds of things do you guys do in your captains and your leadership stuff year-round?
Oh, we meet every couple of weeks and just talk about things. We give them scenarios. You talk about Kimberly. We read excerpts from the book Twin Thieves
great book.
by Steve Jones, and we just talk about how that can be applied to what we're doing. And it's during basketball season, it's during baseball season, so I say, hey, you guys can do this during these other seasons. You can do this in the classroom. We talk about just being together, and that's a big Kimberly thing too, but we're together in everything we're doing, and we talk about how that can be tough. We talk about being tough, relentless, and together, and we talk about those are our core values, and we really want to talk. We don't want to just say those. We want to make sure our kids are doing those, and not just on the football field, but in the locker room, in the weight room, in the community, at home, in the classroom. So that's just something that we want to change. So if someone asks, hey, what are your core values, our kids can talk about it.
That's great.
Let's look ahead to your conference. Obviously, you have one more big non-conference game this week, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But the Merriwood Conference, sort of a bittersweet thought that this is the end of the Merriwood Conference because of the realignment. But it's been a great football conference.
Bittersweet. You see where we're going next year, right?
Yeah. But let's talk about the league though this year, because obviously it's been such a really the Edgar and Colby has been just stellar. Then Auburndale coming from the ashes a few years ago where they were actually playing a little bit of 8-player, and then your program in Pittsville won some big games late down the stretch last season. How do you see the conference this year?
Yeah, and don't forget Abbotsford. They have a great coach in Jake Miller, and they were down last year, but he gets those guys ready all the time, and so it's a week in and week out battle. It's going to be, like I said, we got to win some of those games to reach our goal of making the playoffs, but it's a tough conference. Like you said, Edgar and Colby have been there. Auburndale's been great lately. Abbotsford's done in the past. Pittsville's come in. They have a nice physical team. I think their numbers are okay down there as well. It's going to be a challenge to get wins in the conference, but if you want to get in the playoffs and win some games there, you better win some in your conference.
Let's look ahead to this week's game, because Stanley Boyd, obviously, they're always a solid program, but it looks like this year they really do have a team that's going to make some noise and perhaps take a rather significant step forward. In terms of preparing for this week, what have you noticed about the Orioles? What do you expect to see on Friday night?
They're fast. They're fast, and they're bigger than they have been in the past. They got a nice line. They're well coached. I know Jeff Caney's family boy's my alma mater, so I know those guys pretty well. And I joke, you have a coach for every kid on the team. It seems like they have 10, 12, 14 coaches on the sideline. So they have you well scouted. During the game, they have kids, guys looking at a monitor because they know what you're doing. So you better be ready to go. And this year, like I said, they are fast. They're super fast. They're always pretty quick, but this year they're fast, and they got some size as well. So they looked really good last week against Cadott.
Coach, any thoughts on any questions here? Well, I don't want to.
Well, no.
I don't want to ask
absolutely. So what do you look to do to slow that speed down, Coach? I mean, obviously, I'm not looking for you to give up your game plan here, but what types of things will you look to do on defense to combat that?
We have some different packages based on what they do. What makes it tough to play Stanley Boyd is they will do that NASCAR. They'll get going. They'll do no huddle. If they see you with personnel that maybe doesn't fit what they're doing, they're going to go fast. Last year we were up, I don't even want to talk about, we were up 28-6 in the second half. They started going fast on us, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to run the ball. We're going to get a couple first downs. Well, all of a sudden we couldn't run the ball. They stopped us. We punted. They got a punt return. So, last year I took my foot off the gas. We were like at 26, and we said, hey, they're going fast. We better slow things down, and we have to play our game. And last year, I think if I would have kept throwing the ball, we maybe would have won 56-40 that we lost in overtime. So we have to play our game, and on defense, like I said, we have to be ready with a personnel group on the field that can adjust to what they throw at us.
And for yourself, I guess one final question about the game on Friday. Based on what you saw last Friday, based on what you've seen from your team, in practice, what are the one or two areas that you have to get better at, both this week, for this game, and generally? What have you seen where, hey, I can see some C's, but here are a couple of areas we have to be better at in order to take those steps forward?
Just football in general, we have to block better. I thought the varsity got better as they went on, but we still, when we're blocking, we'll still make contact and stop our feet. We'll maybe use our hands to our shoulder on. We got to drive them back, and we'll let guys come around because we're not driving. So just blocking and then tackling, same thing. We got to get used to running through guys, tackling, and not stopping our feet on contact. We got too many guys right now that are stopping their feet on contact where, against a quick team, if you're stopped, they're going to run right by or make a cut. We have to finish through guys. So just tackling and blocking, just get better at football.
Hey, Coach, congrats on the big win down in Kenosha. Hopefully, the last of the 3-hour, 45-minute or so trips around back and forth, but able to come back with the win was obviously important. Best of luck against Stanley Boyd on Friday. And again, really appreciate you spending a few minutes with us.
Oh, yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
Good luck, Coach. Keep that foot on the gas.
Appreciate it. We will.
Head coach Ryan Winkler of the Marathon Red Raiders. Again, Marathon at Stanley Boyd coming up Friday night, 6:35 airtime right here on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. We're going to talk more about this upcoming week a little bit later, but coming up in just a few moments, we'll be talking to Caden Bankston, our student-athlete guest from DC Everest, coming up next here on WXCO. And welcome back. It's hour number 2 of the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. Online at bullfallsradio.com. Mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app. With Jason Foster, I'm Chad Holmes. Again, thanks to our first guest in the first hour, Marathon head football coach Ryan Winkler. And now it's time to visit with our student-athlete guest for this week. From DC Everest High School, senior Caden Bankston. Caden, first of all, thanks for coming on over here tonight.
Thank you for bringing me on tonight.
Well, number one, let's talk about yourself, your career, your season, your upcoming season. But let's talk about the first game of the year, because last week was game number 1. You and your teammates had a chance to play on Thursday night, so a shorter turnaround from the scrimmage the previous Friday. Went over to Green Bay, took on Preble, and won 40-21. Watching the game, it looked like your team had a lot of guys be involved. It looked like generally a really good game number 1. What was the feeling for you and your teammates in week 1?
I just felt like we were really playing together that game. like we have a great team bond this year, I think. And our team, like whenever we play together, we really get up on ourselves and keep each other motivated. And I think that's what really won us the game is we were all together. Unlike last year, we kind of had some players that had some beef with each other and like didn't like each other. But I think this year we really have a really strong bond, and I think that's kind of why we won the game.
I think that's a great point. I think that's a really important part of that team chemistry. I think probably noticed that a little bit out of you guys last year. What types of things did you do this off season with Coach Strelo, and what types of things did you do in camp this year to kind of turn that around or get that heading back in the right direction?
Yeah, so this year, Coach Strelo and Coach Bohm actually put together a leadership council. So we had to it's a certain select group of guys, and he selected about 20 guys, juniors and seniors, and we all kind of worked together, and we created this, we call it the Leadership Council, and like basically we're all leaders on the team. So yes, we have captains and all that kind of stuff, but that's just kind of like for our coin flips and all that kind of stuff. But this year we have like leadership, so like our Leadership Council, which is 20 guys, is leading the team this year, and we made up a thing called Grow It, and whenever we're down, so like if Preble scored a touchdown, we'd all be saying, grow it, come on, like let's stick together, let's do this, and we just kind of grind and grit it out, and we'd all get back together.
Good stuff.
Along the same lines, again, I said this to you during the break, the fact that the guys did celebrate with each other, it was very noticeable last week. Was that something that was talked about? Was it natural? Because, again, like you said, when a team is together, it just makes everything better. What is the response? Just a natural outgrowth of what you guys were doing during the off season and the feeling you guys have for each other?
Yeah, in practice, our coach, he'll always punish us if we don't celebrate. So if a defense gets a pick, he wants the whole team in there celebrating. And even though it's practice, we treat it like a game.
Yeah, that's great. I think we talked a little bit off air as well about when you look at your stats from last week: 9 rushes, 65 yards, and a touchdown. That's a really solid night. And the reason for that is the game was in hand, and Coach kind of took you guys out in early season, give some other guys some opportunities. But I look at that and I think the way you talked about it and the way you said it speaks a lot to where you guys are at right now and where you might be able to get to. That no worries with that, knowing that that's part of the process. Is that kind of the mindset of the whole team?
Yeah, I think the whole team's just really together on this, and I think that everyone thinks it's really important if we stay together. And I think even if we get down on ourselves and we start splitting up, and I think that's how we're going to lose the games. But if we stick together, I think anything's possible.
Player led, yeah.
Yep. Again, we're talking to DC Everest senior Caden Bankston here on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. I want to ask about one part of last year, the last game, the playoff game at Hudson, because I said this to you, again in the break, where you finished off the regular season on a real down note. I think it's fair to say your team didn't play very well in the final game of the regular season. Nobody gave you a shot when you're going over to Hudson, a team that's ranked in the top 2 in the state in Division I, and your team came, so close to pulling off a major upset. Is there something you guys could take away, the guys that are returning this year, about that game, about how even though you may not have had the results during the regular season that maybe you wanted to, you showed that ability to go on the road against a really good football program and nearly pull off a playoff win? Are you able to take some things away from that game going into the offseason and going into this year? Yeah,
I think our whole team was really down on themselves because going into the game, our whole school, Wausau West, I think every team in the conference was doubting us. They were just saying, oh, you guys are not going to win. They're ranked number 2, blah, blah, blah. But we really just kind of, I think all of us got angry at everybody saying those things, and we went down there and we gave it our best fight, and we had our backup quarterback. I think that kind of changed a little things. We were more run heavy instead of pass heavy because Jack Babinski, our quarterback, had the best arm and he was out, so we kind of had to rely on the run game. And I think we were just all really together, and then it kind of showed, and I think that put a good note on this season.
Awesome.
Let's talk about your team this year. Obviously, as a senior, you have leaders for the whole team, but you have that experience. You've been around the block. You've been a productive player for your team. When you look at your squad, what do you think is the strength of this team? Outside of, as you say, the togetherness, but when you look between the lines, what do you think is the strength going into week number 2?
Well, I think it's our new quarterback. I think he's a great leader, Logan George. He's got a great arm. He plays baseball, so I think that kind of helps things out. But he's really been a great leader this year. He's kind of put others before him. He's been learning and a couple weeks ago, we didn't even know he was going to be our starting quarterback. And then our coaches just made the decision that, you know what, Logan, we're going with you. We trust you. You have a great arm. So let's see what you can do. And I think week 1, he proved himself.
So I think it's probably safe to assume that going into week 1 against Preble, you guys probably had a pretty good feeling about that game, right? Historically, you've kind of given it to them. And you did exactly what you should do on the road week 1 against a team like that. Shifting into week 2, when you look heading over to Chippewa Falls, a team that you've competed with well the last couple of years, but come up short. How does the mindset change this week going into what I'm sure you guys are looking at as a tougher opponent and probably having a little revenge factor?
Yeah, so the last 2 years, it's always been a great game. We lost both times, but I think this year, our coaches, us, they've been all pushing us really harder for this game because we know it's going to be a little bit difficult game. And the last 2 years, we've lost by 1 or 2 scores. And I think if we come in, we get an early score, something like that, like we did against Preble, I think that they'll get down on themselves and we can kind of get up on ourselves and just bring it into halftime. And then halftime, we got to come out, and even if we have the win, if we don't have the win, we got to keep going.
Let's talk, we'll get back to some football, but let's talk about outside football a little bit. What's your favorite class at school?
I'd have to say English, just because I like reading, and I think that it's a good skill that everybody should have to know because you're going to have to read for the rest of your life.
Are you a fiction or a nonfiction reader?
Probably nonfiction.
Is there a type of nonfiction that you like the best?
No, just I like nonfiction probably the best.
Do you have any idea of going to college something that you're looking at? Is that something you're thinking about?
Yeah, I'm still undecided, but I think that going to college is probably something I'm going to do. I'm not for sure yet if I'm going to go for a sport, but that's definitely on the back of my mind.
Are you a multi-sport athlete?
Yes, I also play baseball.
Your coaches aren't listening, so we're going to ask you, do you prefer football or baseball?
I'd have to say football just because it's more of a kind of physical sport, and I feel like anybody can play football. You just kind of have to have the mindset, and it's more of kind of like a tougher sport, I'd say, because not everyone can play football. If it's not for everybody. Practice is hard, and getting hit is not the funnest, so you got to...
What do you like to do when you're not playing football or baseball? What do you do in your free time?
I'd say probably just hanging out with my team. I think team bond is super important, so our team has always been trying to get together this summer. We've been trying to do stuff, have team meals, and kind of prepare for this season.
Sometimes certain families cause issues for broadcasters because when you have the same last name and they're on the field at the same time, that causes issues for those of us in the booth. And there's not just you, but there's another Bankston that's on the field with you, next to you. What's it like playing with your brother?
I think it's honestly a truly great experience because not everyone can say they've played football with their brother and the same position too in high school, and not only 1 year, but I get to play with him 2 years. So I think it's really special because we're both running backs. This is my second year playing with him because he started last year as a sophomore, and I'll never forget it.
Again, we're talking to Caden Bankston from DC Everest, our student-athlete guest this week on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. Do you have a favorite rival, a game against a team, whether in baseball or football, that is the most exciting, the ones that get your juices going a little bit more than the others?
Well, I'd have to say Wassa West just because we're right next to them. For football, they've beat us the last couple of years, but even though they win, I think it's a great game, and everybody knows each other, so it's always fun, and we're always hyping each other up and texting each other before the games, and what are you guys gonna do, blah blah blah. And same thing for baseball. The last couple of years, I think they beat us in the playoffs a couple of years ago, but then last year we beat them twice in the regular season, so I think it's a great rival.
I've always been, obviously I have some allegiance to Wassa West, but I've always been really impressed with, it's kind of been neat, these preseason games or these early season games. You guys often play on Thursday, and we'd kind of been playing on Fridays. So our kids love coming over and watching your Thursday night game. And historically, you guys have come right back over on Fridays. And there's some real give and take, or giving it to each other a little bit. But I've always been really impressed after the games when you guys get together on the field, and one team's playing, the other guys are just there watching, but still coming out on the field afterwards. I think it's been really fun to watch, and you guys should be real proud of those relationships and the sportsmanship you've been showing.
When you look to this season, obviously as a senior, your last go around on the gridiron, what are your goals for this year in terms of maybe either both personally in terms of what you want to accomplish as an individual and team-wise as well?
For team-wise, I think it's just to stay together until the season's over. Not giving up on each other halfway through the season because we lost a couple games. I think it's just we got to stay together as a team because we can't win without the whole team, so we need everybody.
All right, as a running back, tell me about your offensive line. What is your relationship with them? What kind of guys you got out in front of you?
Yeah, so we only have a couple seniors this year. One of them's actually hurt right now, so he's not playing, but I think he'll be back in the next couple weeks. Our offensive line is really young. Most of them are juniors, but one of the juniors, Oscar Latondras, has been starting since a freshman, so he's probably our best offensive lineman, and I think I really trust him on the right side of the line, and I think that's why we're doing so good week one, and hopefully we can carry it into week two.
Do you have a favorite coach? Or maybe one that you worked closest with that has helped you the most in terms of maximizing your potential in football.
I love all of our coaches, but if I had to pick one, I'd probably say our running back coach, Coach Wanta, just because he's been there with me at every practice. I spend the most time with him, and he trusts me. Senior year, he trusts me and my brother. He just says, run with your eyes. We're never wrong if we make a wrong read and stuff like that. So I really like him.
And a special note, I graduated high school with Coach Wanta. Same year at DC Everest.
He's been doing it a long time, and he's coached some really good running backs.
Yeah,
so
we're both getting old.
Tradition. Yeah.
And I guess finally, a question that we always ask our student athlete guests, especially those that are a senior, because you've had an opportunity to go through the process for a few years. For those that are young players in your program, whether a freshman or a sophomore that's just starting their journey as a varsity football player at DC Everest, what piece of advice would you be able to give them to maximize their experience with Everest?
I just say take every moment for granted because you'll never know when it'll end. I know a lot of people that quit football because of injuries and all that kind of stuff, and man, does it go fast. Now sitting here as a senior, I still wish I was a freshman because, man, it's fun.
Man, when I hear the student athletes come on here and say it goes fast, you have no idea how fast it really gets when you get a little bit older.
Yeah.
I remember in high school it felt like it was a lot longer, and now it gets a lot shorter. But number one, congrats on the good start last week. Congrats on all the success you've had both in baseball and football. And good luck both Friday night at Chippewa Falls and good luck throughout the course of the season.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Caden Bankston, again, from DC Everest, senior for the Evergreens, who take on Chippewa Falls tomorrow night. I think I may have said Friday night. No, they play tomorrow night, Thursday night, over at DeRay Field in Chippewa Falls. So we're going to take a timeout, come back, and actually look ahead at what's on tap in week number 2. With Jason Foster, I'm Chad Holmes. It is the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. And welcome back. Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. BullFallsRadio.com, mobile devices, and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app with Jason Foster. I'm Chad Holmes. And, Coach, I said this every week. I don't know how many years I've been doing this program, but the best part is when we get a chance to talk both to our coaches and to our student athletes, especially the kids, because I really like the idea that, for most of these guys, you don't have an interview like this where they sit down for 15, 20 minutes and we discuss a bunch of different things, and they handle themselves so well. Caden Bankston, I thought, just handled himself exceptionally well. I hope people appreciate the opportunity to hear a little bit more from the kids and to get a feel for really how good these kids are.
Yeah, that's been one of my favorite parts of the show over the years, to be in here and watch it and observe it. What a great young man Caden is. And it really, it was respectful and said a lot of really good things, and all that was great. But to be here and to see his true emotion and his body language about how excited and proud he is of they won last week. That's great. He was happy and excited about that. But to hear him talk about the process and the joy that's brought to him and what he thinks they're going to be able to accomplish moving forward is pretty neat to see.
8-player football gets underway this week, and of course, we will have the Newman Catholic Cardinals on Saturday in their opener against Three Lakes Phelps right here on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. But looking at generally the 8-player football, and starting with the Central Conference, where Newman Catholic has been so good. They're expected, again, to be one of the top teams. But this year, for Newman, they lost a lot of incredible talent. I mean, last season was a year that you won't see. I mean, the dominance, the way that they performed at such a high level every week. They came out, and it's one thing to be talented. And it's another thing to put it out there every week and play so well. And they had a running clock every week. They beat Belmont in the state championship game 54-0. Obviously what Coach Micklig, his staff, and this program has done, 29 straight wins. Haven't lost a game this decade. Since 2019, the championship game, their last loss. Obviously, you have to respect the consistency that they've been able to put out there on the field every week.
I would say two things. One, as you were listing off all those things, some might even call it unfair at this point with their complete and absolute dominance. And here's what I know about Coach Micklig is he's amazing. I know that 8-man is growing for sure, and it's getting a lot of momentum. But I also know that there's a lot of 8-man programs that still attempt to be coached like 11-man football. And for Coach Micklig and what he does and how completely he understands the 8-man game and how he coaches it and how he executes it on game night has been very impressive. And then on top of that, you work with him and his staff at like perimeter camp over at DC Everest in the summer, and there's no difference. Like the concepts between how you coach a running back and a receiver and the lineman is pretty impressive. Coach Micklig is an outstanding coach, and it's been fun to watch.
8-player is going to be tougher this year. I think it's going to be pretty open. And one of the interesting aspects is how some of the teams that the Cardinals faced in the Cloverwood are now moving to 8-player. Last season, great seasons for teams like Thorpe and Owen Withee and Gilman. Some of these schools were ineligible because they moved outside the 2-year framework, and others were, if you have more than 200 kids in the school, you're not eligible. But this year, I know Owen Withee will be eligible. I believe Gilman and Thorpe. Again, that's one of the aspects I don't like, is we have to wonder who's eligible and who's not. But generally, you got a lot of these schools. McDonald was a team that made the playoffs a year ago, another former Cloverwood team. Number one, you're seeing some of these schools that have had success in the 11-player game. I mean, Gilman went from a playoff team in 11-player to 8-player a year ago, and are still well coached by Coach Rosemeyer. But I just think that generally, both in terms of the coaching, as you said, I think Coach Micklig and his staff have lifted the bar for 8-player football, that if you don't do the things that you're supposed to do, you're going to get embarrassed out there. And then you have some of these, I think, veteran coaches who have had success in the Cloverwood and an 11-player football joining 8-player. It's going to make for a more exciting and I think a deeper pool for 8-player football.
Yeah, I look at all those things you said and completely agree. And then you add in some other programs and teams out there, like I know Hurley is going to 8-man football, and Scotty Eric state championship 11-man program. And I'm kind of really interested to see what he brings to the 8-man game, because he's been a heck of an 11-man coach over the years. So I think he's the type of guy who's going to do it the way Coach Micklig did. He's going to find out everything he needs to know about being successful in that format. And I'm excited to see more competition. My bet is Coach Micklig is probably looking forward to seeing some better competition and some more consistent matchups that aren't maybe quite as much blowouts as we've seen in the past.
I just don't think it's going to be the same with, again, I think people, they see number one ranked again this season, and I say this all the time, rankings are for entertainment purposes only. Don't get caught up in the rankings, because this is going to be interesting Saturday against Three Lakes Phelps. They opened last season, and Three Lakes Phelps played as well against Newman as anybody did. In the end, Newman was able to pull away in the second half. They have a lot of their talent back. They're a team that's expected to battle Florence in their conference, the Northern Border. The first 2 weeks are crossover games. And for Newman, perhaps, arguably, the first 2 games are going to be their toughest 2 games, because Florence is the preseason favorite. They play them next week, and then they have Three Lakes this week. So, again, I think that with all those losses, you're going to see a Newman team, and as you well know, when you face teams like you faced back in the day, Kimberly, boy, when you face a team that had been winning state championships and had long winning streaks, everybody wants to be the team to knock them off. Right. And that target no matter whether they're the same players from these two state championship games or different players, that target is still on anybody wearing the Columbia blue of Newman.
Yeah, very cliche, but that every week's a Super Bowl for their opponent. I mean, you knock off Newman, and people around the state are going to be talking about that. I look at some of the names on there. You mentioned Three Lakes and Florence. It takes me back to my time up in Eagle River at Northland Pines as a head coach when every year we played Three Lakes in 11-man football. There's a lot of tradition up there. They've had really nice basketball programs. They've had some nice runs as 11-man football, and they've always been really coached and really well coached in all those other sports. So, and Florence is another one. I mean, they were a mainstay up in Northern Lights Conference in 11-man football for years. So I would imagine they're going to bring a pretty solid effort to the field as well.
So Newman Catholic Saturday afternoon will kick off their season against Three Lakes Phelps. Game will be on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, starting with the pregame show at 12:35 and the opening kickoff at 1 p.m. We're going to take a quick break and come back and look at all the action in week number 2. Look at some very interesting matchups. And I want to ask Coach Foster as well about these early season non-conference games. Who do you want to play? Do you want to play the best teams? Do you want to play the teams that perhaps you think you can get a W, get some confidence built? We're going to delve a little bit into that as well. So we'll take a break, come back, preview week number 2 coming up here on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 12. And welcome back. Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. And again, also, if you miss our program, you can get it wherever you get your podcasts or by going to bullfallsradio.com. Click on either sports or shows. Click on sports, probably the simplest way. You'll see Big High School Sports Show along with the logos of our 3 schools that we cover. We have all of our previous broadcasts of Wausau West, Marathon, and Newman Catholic High School Sports, and also our previous broadcasts of the Big High School Sports Show. And in fact, this show will be put up there pretty soon after we're done at 8 o'clock tonight. So again, if you miss any of the show, you can listen on a podcast or on the archive page at bullfallsradio.com. Week number 2, and this is kind of it's similar as the Packers, actually, because they play their final preseason game coming up. In a sense, week number 2 is the preseason because in terms of playoffs, it does not matter.
Right.
It does matter, obviously, in terms of wins and losses. And I will say this as well. The non-conference games on the 8-player side actually do count. They have all their games go into the mix in terms of determining who is going to make the 16-team playoffs in 8-player football. But for 11-player, obviously, and I think starting next year, you have no real choice on who you play. Up until this point, whether it's basketball or hockey or football, to a certain extent, you'd have a choice on who you play for your non-conference games. When you were coaching, did you have a philosophy on who you wanted to play? Did it depend on what type of team you had back? What were your thoughts on the non-conference games?
Yeah, one of the most challenging parts of it is you kind of schedule 2-year home and aways, and then you kind of have to schedule them 2-3 years out. So there's that piece of the guessing game. But ultimately, a lot of it depended on who and what you are and where you were at in your program at that time. If you're coming off a 1-8 season or several losing seasons, you kind of look to maybe find a game where you can experience some success or know for sure that you're at least going to be competitive in week 1 and week 2 and kind of build that confidence going in. If you're in a good place, I mean, if you were a playoff qualifier the year before and conference champ and looking to kind of make that next step, I think you look to step it up a little bit. I know we are, as we transition into our the new realignments for next season, like you said, we've kind of lost that. But we had Kimberly was really looking for. I mean, they lost their week one this year, and they were really looking for a week one last year. So Coach was talking with our coach, and our coach was Coach Johnson was up for it. Like that was where we're at right now. We thought that would be a great way to start the year. It's a great measuring stick to see where you are, and you come out and you compete, and you know where you need to go week 2, and then heading into the conference.
But you don't want to leave your opponent hanging either. I mean, that's the problem with it. It's like, it's been wonderful to have that opportunity, but then you have your friends from Superior who would say, oh, well, what about us?
Right.
And they treated us really well last week. So it was
good news with the realignment and how everything starts over. We get to go right back up there week 1 next year.
Don't even say that. I know that, and I think it's just too soon. I mean, pulling into the West parking lot at 2 a.m. is just a little bit too late. I tell you, that's and we got to do it again next. I told the folks in the booth, I said, "We'll see you next year." It's like, thank you for being nice. I'll be back next year. Save my space. It's like that. But let's look ahead. Let's start with the VFA. Week number 2. Again, next week we start the conference. So non-conference and some good matchups again this week. Starting again tomorrow, both DC Everest and Wisconsin Rapids play games tomorrow night. DC Everest takes on Chippewa Falls. The Evergreens will be at Steam Stadium hosting the Chi-High Cardinals. Chippewa Falls beat Holman last week, 17-14. Running back Jackson LeMay for Chippewa Falls had 20 carries, 116 yards and a touchdown. Quarterback Mason Van Hayden, 11-17, 97 yards and a score. But it's just, again, a really good matchup. We saw some VFA Big Rivers matchups last week, another one here this week. And the thing is, we could see this kind of matchup when we get to late October.
Yeah, I actually love these matchups right now because it gives us a good look at where these teams are at right now. And it was funny, as we talked about realignment and we talked about which way we were going to go, east or west or whatever, and you look at the Valley schools' non-conference schedules, we're going over there quite a bit already. So it's really not that big of a stretch to make those leaps. But I think Chippewa Falls is one of those. They're probably not in that Tier 1, but they're a playoff qualifier just about every year. So I think this is a great matchup for Everest, and I think it'll be a good measuring stick for them to see where they're at in week 2 as they head into the conference.
And I know with all those computers, I don't know what it all means, but at the same time, these tend to be the games that do matter. That so often, if both Everest and Chippewa Falls make the playoffs, often they'll be in the same 8-team pod, and this could be a significant indicator on whether or not you have to make a road trip that first week of the postseason.
Yeah, the computer will definitely take that into consideration at the end of the year.
And Wisconsin Rapids will try and bounce back after their tough start at River Falls last week. They travel again, another road trip for the Red Raiders. They travel to Stoughton. Stoughton fell to Oregon last week, 20-13. Stoughton last year was 3-6. They're a Division III squad, but the thing is, they returned most of their starters. They played pretty well against Oregon last week. It's not going to be an easy game for Wisconsin Rapids, but as you said, Tony Biolo's been around for such a long time. He knows the drill. When you're bringing in some players into significant positions, the need to be patient, but at the same time, I'm sure they would like to have some good things happen going into the conference next week.
Yeah, it kind of piggybacking off of what you said earlier is how do you build your schedule kind of going into it? And when they were competing and winning conference championships the last couple of years, they were playing Sun Prairie week 1 and Middleton week 1, and now that they kind of are in this, Stoughton's no slouch of a team, but this is maybe a step down and an opportunity for him to look to be a little more competitive this week.
Friday night, the rest of the VFA in action. Wausau West at Tom Field for the first time this year, hosting De Pere. A game that you can hear bullfallsradio.com, Sports Stream 2 live at 6:35, also on the Civic Media app, Sports Stream 2, and also on delay after the marathon game. De Pere played a very interesting game last week, 49-37 last week at Neenah. Very good Neenah squad. The defense had a hard time slowing down the run game. 450 yards on the ground for Neenah. Last week, 10 yards per carry. Grant Dean, and I got to tell you, I'm going to keep an eye on this kid because I was watching the stream of it earlier today. Grant Dean had 282 yards on 26 carries, ran a kickoff back 88 yards for a touchdown, almost had an interception as well. And the part I saw, maybe he had an interception later in the game. But so it was obviously, but you got to think that Ray Reinick is saying, "Oh man, I like those numbers." The Warriors were able to run the ball so very well normally. So Wausau West, usually a very good run team, a De Pere team that's had a lot of trouble stopping the run last week. It looks like a recipe for Wausau West to move the football.
Yeah, and De Pere's had a rough time stopping the run against Wausau West the last 2 years, so I think obviously they'll look to do that. I think last week's game offensively for De Pere is probably a little misleading. I know they're a spread team, but I think they ended up throwing as much as they did last week because they were down, and Nina was running the wheels off the bus, so they had to try to keep up, and they did that. So it'll be interesting to see what they bring in for their game plan this week and how West reacts to their ability to put the ball over the top.
Another interesting game, Wausau East on the road again, up north to Rhinelander, taking on the Hodags. Of course, the Lumberjacks, victorious at Lakeland last week, taking on another great Northern Conference foe. Rhinelander, momentum after coming from behind to win 22-21 at Lakeland last week. Oh, excuse me, at Tomahawk last week. East looking for 2 in a row. I mean, after last week, you got to feel like, hey, if they can play as solid as they did last week, a pretty good chance. But one thing I want to ask you as well, after that win, you can just imagine the thrill. I mean, it was such a big win for that program. As a coach, how do you kind of have the equilibrium of that team? Say, hey, you got another game coming up here this week. You got more games coming up after that. It probably felt a lot like winning a Super Bowl last week.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite honestly, the impact a win like that has on a program and a school and half of a community when you look at where they've been and to where they are now. But yeah, I think this game's going to tell us a lot about both of these teams. They both kind of in a rebuilding phase. They both had what they consider nice wins last week, come in with some confidence. So I think this is going to tell us a lot.
Marshfield, boy, again, they had a rough one last week at Hudson. Another road trip against another really good team this week at New Richmond. New Richmond, they went to Medford last week, led 34-0 at halftime, and then won 44-24. So obviously for Marshfield and another veteran coach in Denny Gadel, another really stiff test.
Yeah, and I think this is probably a nice matchup for them. I think what typically what Marshfield does on offense and the athletes and the strength that they have in their team. And I think that's kind of the type of team that New Richmond is as well. So I think we'll know a lot more about Marshfield heading into week 3.
Going to know more about Stevens Point as well. They have a McWanago last week, Hudson this week. Hudson makes the trek to Gerke Field Friday night. And again, Stevens Point, there's always this thought. Stevens Point with, again, the numbers within their community, their school, they're going to have athletes, and they do have athletes. But last year, a struggle. Last week, 35-7 against McWanago. What do we know about Stevens Point at this point? Are the expectations too high for Stevens Point, or should we still expect Stevens Point to be a team that should be able to step up?
I think, kind of like we mentioned earlier, this is year 2, like this for this coach, and he's looking to take steps forward. Obviously, another tough test, and you certainly aren't going to completely change something based on the outcome of this game, but I would expect Hudson to give them all they can handle this week and us to maybe kind of be wondering a little bit what Spash is going to bring to the conference table after heading into week 3.
Another team expected to be near the top of the conference is Hortonville. They have a really interesting game at Pulaski this week. Pulaski expected to battle in the top half of the FRCC North with Bayport and West De Pere. Obviously, 2 great programs. They were third behind those 2 teams a year ago in that conference. Last week, Pulaski lost 35-13 to the number 1 ranked team in the state in Division III, Notre Dame Academy. I'm used to saying Notre Dame Academy only during the winter, not mentioning them during the fall. But Pulaski also lost at Marshfield in Level 1 last year, 21-13. But Hortonville, again, another really stiff test. And we're going to learn a lot about how much of a factor we expect them to be in the conference starting next week.
Yeah, I think this is a great matchup as far as us gauging where Hortonville is at. Pulaski is pretty consistent number 3 finisher in that FRCC. Very consistent playoff qualifier. Not dominant, not making deep runs, but I would assume they're that type of team again this year. So I think we will know a lot more about how Hortonville stacks up against a playoff caliber team as opposed to the really good West De Pere team they played last week.
I don't know if they have a log or what over in Appleton, but east and west of Appleton will be facing off on Friday night. Appleton East at Appleton West. Appleton West, as we talked about, struggled against Manitowoc Lincoln. I think that's a bit of a red flag for them.
Yeah.
But Appleton East played really well against a really good Menasha team, a program that's been very good. Went right down to the wire, but Appleton East lost 21-19. And again, I think you look at, for that part of the state, you look at the stability Appleton East had. A coach, I wish tip of my tongue, but from River Lake Prentice, when they were pretty good, and he left for Appleton East, and Appleton West trying to rebuild. And Appleton East took it to him pretty well last year.
Yeah, I think this definitely has the potential to have that rivalry game flair, and anything can happen in those games. But I would say from a programmatic standpoint, Appleton East is definitely ahead of where Appleton West is right now.
I tell you, whenever someone says anything can happen, normally anything can't happen.
Valid point.
That's just my opinion, but we hear it all the time, and I know I've used it a time or two, but normally not everything can happen, but we'll see what happens. If Appleton West comes back and wins it, we'll say anything happened when we talk next week.
Sounds good.
Great Northern Conference, Mosinee will try to bounce back at Clintonville. This should be an offensive showcase because Clintonville, they played Amherst last week, but they're a team that moves the football. Their quarterback, Cade Rosenau, threw for more than 2,800 yards a year ago. Mosinee, they're going to want to get that offense going. I expect this to be a high-scoring game.
Yep, should be a shootout. I would imagine that Keegan Jersley's not very happy about 3 catches for 25 yards last week and looking to really build on that.
Medford is playing another tough game. Medford, again, they lost quite a bit from their team a year ago, and they go to Onalaska this week. Onalaska is ranked for entertainment purposes only, number 4 in Division III. They fell in overtime last week, 35-28 to D3 number 2 West Salem, who they had lost to in the Level 4 playoffs last year. So talk about a great Week 1 game, a Level 4 rematch. Onalaska did beat Medford last season in Level 2, 42-12. Again, Medford last season got off to a bit of a slow start, facing some really tough competition, the same teams that they face again this year. But at the same time, it does feel like, again, if you had the magic wand to schedule at this point, you don't want to get pounded twice in a row, and this is going to be a tough one for Medford.
It is. Onalaska, actually, I have a lot of respect for their head coach, and he's been there long enough now, and that program's definitely heading in the right direction. So this is going to be a tough week for Medford, I fear.
And Merrill looking to bounce back. Boy, they had a rough one at home last week, and they have a trip to Crandon. Crandon lost to you talked about Hurley. Hurley beat them 24-8 last week. Crandon picked 3rd in the Northwoods Conference. And for the Merrill Blue Jays, you tried to, I imagine after a game like last week, I don't think they went into that game last week expecting 41-0, a loss at Jay Stadium. This week, as a coach, how do you go about trying to rebuild the confidence for the Merrill squad?
Well, you got to flush that one. You got to put that in your rearview mirror, and you very short memory. You don't spend a lot of time watching that film after the game. You kind of turn the page real quickly Friday night into Saturday. As coaches, you watch it a lot, but you don't put the athletes in front of it, and you really quickly get onto the game plan for week 2.
Other games in the GNC, Tomahawk at Lakeland. Last season, Tomahawk knocked off Lakeland. It was a big win for that Hatchet program. And Sturgeon Bay is at Antigo as well. Sturgeon Bay beat Waupun 52-22 last week. A veteran team, 8 starters back on each side of the ball. As I said, Antigo expecting to build this season, but another tough one. But this time it's at home in Antigo. And that Lakeland Tomahawk game is also an interesting one. As you said earlier, that will be a conference game next year.
Yeah. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not 100% sure on this, but did Tomahawk knock Lakeland off early in the year last year?
Yes,
And
they
then
did.
Kind of Lakeland went on their 5-game win streak to end the season. So this one's probably got a little extra meaning for those 2 teams as well.
Let's talk about the Merrillwood Marathon at Stanley Boyd. We had a good preview of that one with Coach Winkler, but this is going to say a lot about Marathon because I do think that Stanley Boyd, a team that was a little bit down, I think, normal Stanley Boyd from last season. This is a talented and experienced team. It's going to be a very stiff test for the Red Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting listening to Coach talk about last year's game. And so I would imagine he spent a lot of time this offseason watching that film. That's probably one of his nightmare games from last year. So you really break that film down, you come up with a great game plan, and they've probably been chomping at the bit to get another bite at that apple.
Yeah, Stanley Boyd beat Cadott 44-28 last week, and they have 9 defensive starters back and 8 on offense. Well, you don't see that very often with that many starters back, especially for a team that made the playoffs 4-5, finished 4-6 overall. Edgar and Stratford.
The granddaddy of them all.
Not a conference matchup this time around, but Obviously, Edgar, you're not. I was saying to somebody, what kind of bizarre world are we living in? East won last week and Edgar lost. And you never see Edgar 0-2, but boy, they're going to Stratford. Stiff test, but man, Edgar's going to be ready to go and give Stratford everything they possibly can.
Yeah, and obviously you would assume Stratford's the favorite going into this game, but I would never rule out Coach Sins going into any football game.
Bigfoot at Auburndale. Auburndale, again, coming off a big win. Another game against a team that's expected to be in their cellar of their conference, a team that won only one game a year ago. They lost to Whitewater 26-14 last week. Whitewater was the team they beat last season in the openers. Didn't get them this year. That's the thing about it. Again, we talked about it. You don't want to maybe sometimes play the team that's going to pound on you a little bit, but at the same time, as we heard from Coach Winkler about the cancellation, those games it's difficult, isn't it?
It's hard to coach in those games. It's hard to manage your players in those games as far as how much you want to get them there. You want to get them ready for week 2 and you want to get them their reps, but also you don't want to just run up the score and do those things. So I think that Auburn is probably going to have another look like that this week, so they will kind of head into the conference maybe a little bit untested.
3 other games in the Merriwood. Spencer Columbus at Colby. Again, Spencer Columbus off a 70-0 loss last week. Colby, obviously, very good. A very tough matchup for Spencer Columbus. Abbotsford at Melrose Mindoro. Melrose Mindoro fell to the second-ranked team in D7 last week, Bangor 31-0. They had made the playoffs 18 straight years until last year, picked 4th in their league this season. Abbotsford coming off a nice win in week number 1, and Cadott at Pittsville. Cadott lost to Stanley Boyd last week, as I mentioned, 44-28. They won their first playoff game in 2 decades last season before losing to Stratford in Level 2. Those 3 games, I think Pittsville and Abbotsford feeling optimistic. Spencer Columbus feeling very apprehensive going to Colby against a very good team.
Yep, that's going to be a tough 2-week stretch for Spencer Columbus.
CWC Large. We already talked about Edgar and Stratford. Wittenberg, Burnhamwood at Iola Scandinavia. That used to be a battle within the conference before Iola went to the CWC Small. They had been a really good program. They made it down to state, Camp Randall. Outstanding program. Had a tough year a year ago. But based off of last week, it looks like Iola Scandinavia, and you would expect them to bounce back. It looks like they're a solid team at home against what looks to be a terrific Whitburn squad.
Yeah, this should be a great matchup. I'm sure Wittenberg's looking forward to maybe a little more challenge this week and kind of sharpening their saw a little bit heading into the conference.
Good matchup for Amherst this week. They're at Two Rivers. Two Rivers, preseason favorite in the Eastern Wisconsin Conference. They went undefeated until the state semifinals a year ago. Obviously, a very good program. They beat Bondwell last week. Amherst coming off a massive offensive explosion last week. When you look at non-conference games, that one looks like it could be one of the better ones in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's a great week 2 matchup. A lot of eyes going to be on that one.
CWC Small. Assumption makes a trek to Pepin Alma. Again, another really good non-conference matchup. Pepin Alma beat Elmwood Plum City 46-28 last week. Preseason favorite in the Dairyland Conference, unbeaten last season until a level 3 loss to Bangor in Division 7. Assumption, again, a team that's expected to win that conference. A good test for Assumption, especially if they want to make a deep run, because I think the conference is not that strong. They will get some tests with those crossovers with the Merriwood, but when you get to the D7 playoffs, this is exactly the kind of team you're going to face.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This will be a good early season matchup for them, and one that they'll probably look back and grow on as they head into the playoffs, and a good win for them if they can pull it off from a computer ranking standpoint.
And Pacelli, again, from the CWC Small at Brookfield Academy. Both those teams making pretty long treks. Brookfield Academy, a team that beat University School of Milwaukee 49-29 last week. Again, I'm not supposed to talk about University School of Milwaukee during the fall. That's only during the winter on the ice. But Brookfield Academy picked 3rd in the Midwest Classic. A very young team, but Pacelli, a team that started very slowly last season, made a great run to make the playoffs last season, got off to a really good start this year. It's been a pretty solid program. And of course, you go back to Bob Rodchek and all the years he did it. But last few years as well have been very solid.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see them get back to where they once were, and this might be a nice step in that direction.
We got about a minute and a half to go as we go into week number 2. any thoughts, anything that you're going to be looking for here, whether it's a matchup you're looking at, whether it's just generally conferences, what you're looking for as we have the final almost dress rehearsals before the conferences begin next week?
I think the two conference types things I'm looking at is to kind of look at the Fox Valley Association or the Valley Football Association. Going back a few years there.
Yeah.
And just to see how these matchups, because I think the conference is wide open. Obviously, there's predictions and there's rankings and stuff out there, but I think there's a lot of uncertainty when you look at who's won the conference the last 2 years, and you keep waiting for Hortonville to kind of like I thought they were going to be better than they were last year. So are they going to get that traction? And then I think in the Great Northern, like, is Mosinee going to kind of shake off that tough loss to Stratford and kind of take their place at the top? And is Medford going to be able to show some competitiveness as they head in the conference and let Mosinee, they're going to be tough. And then those teams underneath them, you kind of talk about Lakeland having a run of 5 wins to end last season and make it into the playoffs and feeling good coming in this year. They were probably set back a little bit by that week 1 loss. So how do those teams bounce back? I also think the Wausau East Rhinelander is going to kind of be telling for both of those teams and what their impact could or may not be in the conference as the year goes on.
One of those teams will be a surprising 2-0.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. One of those teams will be 2-0 Friday night. Well, nice start.
Well, it was great being here. I certainly did not fill Coach Novinsky's shoes, but maybe a small baby step in the right direction.
He's Jason Foster. I'm Chad Holmes. We'll be back next week at 6 here on Bull Falls Radio 98.9.